Well, welcome back. There's Milton. There goes Milton. Okay. We want to kind of pick up where we left off with the stress response and trauma and dive a little bit into Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I forgot to say it in the last video because I tend to do that. If you like this video, please hit the like and then subscribe. And if you hit the notifications and notification all, you'll get a little alert that a new video is coming out. Or has come out. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs is basically a triangle, and at the bottom, it's got your basics, right? So your physiological needs, your food, water, sleep, the things you need basically to survive. And then up from that, you've got safety, physical, emotional, and mental safety. So, not all of these, I guess, steps or ladders or however you want to look at this needs to be fulfilled 100%. It's very subjective. So whatever your need is in order to move to the next need to be filled sufficiently is totally dependent on you. And so the next one up is safety, physical, emotional, mental safety. And then love and belonging. So once safety needs are met satisfactorily, right? Love and belonging. Is part of that hierarchy. Now, and these all kind of mesh together as well. So it's not like, you meet one and then you just kind of let it go, and then the next one and kind of let it go, and then the next one. You bring them all with you as you sort of climb up this pyramid. Love and belonging is absolutely a need for human beings. We were designed for connection and relationship. So love and belonging, if you're not in healthy relationships, chances are you're in unhealthy relationships, right? And maybe even with yourself. So love and belonging, family, friends, support, social groups, that kind of thing. These first three needs of the five, we'll talk about the other two in just a minute, are what we call D needs or deficiency needs. So if you're deficient in any of these needs, physiological, food, water, sleep, safety, physical, emotional, or mental safety, or love and belonging, our friends, social groups, and family. If you're deficient in any of these, it causes disease, disorder, dysfunction. That's why they're called D needs or deficiency needs. The one up from there, then the two on the top are what we call being needs or the B needs. So the next one would be esteem, which basically means I'm accepted and valued by others. It's kind of your value system, right? How you value yourself in the society in which you function. So up from there, we're looking at, and I want to make very, very clear, self-esteem is a very subjective measurement too. So self-esteem has been really over bloated for a really, really long time. It doesn't really mean much. I think we would put this more into the context of self efficacy, competence, and feeling confident and know that you can tackle the challenges that are ahead, right? So that would be more of this esteem sort of step in Maslow's hierarchy. And then self-actualization, which is the process of becoming, and then you fill in the blank. Oftentimes this refers to is knowing that you're part of something bigger than yourself, contributing, having some purpose and meaning beyond oneself as part of the self-actualization process. It's not an end goal, it's just a continue process. So beyond that, Maslow talked about transcendence and peak experiences, which we'll not quite get into here, but it's very, very fascinating if you ever read his works on all of that. There's also a study that came out called it was a new theoretical sort of process of becoming called the coalescence of being, which kind of combines self-determination and self-efficacy and the self-actualization concept, and combined all of those things with peak experiences and said, well, maybe this is kind of the process of how we become or how we fulfill our fullest potential. So you can probably look that up. The author's name is, it's Fabian, Fabian, who wrote a research paper in 2020, The Coalescence of Being. Fascinating stuff. You're probably like, yeah. So we're talking about this stuff because when we talk about trauma, when we talk about stress, or we talk about adverse childhood experiences, which I've talked about in previous videos, often what we see are people who have experienced trauma or who have gone through some serious stuff, which is a lot of people. What happens is instead of, the developmental ladder climbing up this hierarchy of needs, if you will, from Maslow, what happens is they tend to get stuck in safety. In this, I'm getting all my physiological needs met, but I'm not, I don't feel physically, mentally, or emotionally safe. So, for example, right, it doesn't necessarily have to do all physical. So you've got a 9-year-old boy who's, um, in a classroom, and he knows his teacher likes him, he trusts her. He just came in from recess and played with all his friends, so he's not afraid of them. But every noise coming from the hallway makes him think that his drunk father is going to come through the door. He is not emotionally or mentally safe in that moment, and he is not going to process the information that the teacher wants him to process in order to learn. So we often see people who get stuck in this from childhood, and this goes all the way on through adulthood. So if it's not addressed, people can really get stuck here. And then you've got, seniors who are still grappling with childhood, developmental issues because they got stuck at a stage where they just didn't move beyond safety. So a lot of times what we see with victims of abuse, and particularly adult victims who are coming out of trafficking, because that was one of the populations I worked with the most and I taught about the most, and all of these things. Of course, it's been a while since I've worked with that population. I've been more kids lately and now college students. So it kind of runs the gamut everywhere. But for those who've been severely traumatized, especially through childhood, what we found was every victim that we worked with of sex trafficking had a history of early childhood sexual abuse, right? There was some serious issues going on very early on. And the related diagnosis coming out of that were, of course, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, or CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a compounding of trauma. So it's a trauma over trauma over trauma, and requires a different kind of therapy. So PTSD is, grievous enough on its own, but it's generally from a single event. So for those who have been chronically abused, we often see PTSD. Of course, anxiety, depression, not your, I'm feeling crappy today kind of anxiety and depression. We're talking, serious addiction issues, suicidal ideation, self-harm, all of these things that go with that. Stockholm syndrome, what we now call trauma bonds, which is a deep psychological attachment to one's captor. And this is especially true, I would say, captor, predator, abuser, whoever that might be. This is especially true, though, when it comes to family members, and especially true when it's a caregiver who was also the abuser or perpetrator, because we are built, we're born with this innate knowing and need to be loved and cared for by our parents. And when that doesn't happen, or there's this what we call disorganized attachment, we'll talk about that in a second, this disorganized attachment, there's this sense of maybe, I love them, they take care of me, I owe them, but being deeply afraid at the same time. So that's what we call Stockholm syndrome or trauma bonds. We often see this as a barrier for victims when they go in to testify against their perpetrator in domestic violence situations, or whatever the case might be, even trafficking and things. And then dissociation. So dissociation is one of the big indicators, or big diagnosis that we see coming out with victims of trafficking and extreme abuse. And dissociation too exists on a spectrum, just like a Stockholm syndrome and trauma bonds, right? It could be very kind of a small attachment, kind of like, ooh, I kind of feel bad for him today, or, I will take a bullet and die for this person today. Dissociation is kind of the same way. It exists on a spectrum. And the mildest form is highway dissociation. So we all have gone through this process of highway dissociation. If you've ever driven 20 minutes and you're like, I don't remember driving here, but I'm here, or you've ever missed your turn on the expressway because you were swimming somewhere in Hawaii in your head, right? That's highway dissociation. It's being mentally out of the present moment with your physical being, with your physical presence. So we also have what we call derealization, which is absolutely fascinating. So Derealization is the experience of not feeling like the world around you is quite real, or that it's distorted somehow. So things may appear closer or farther away. Walls might melt, floors could move and get wavy. It's having the sense that your body just isn't spatially acting in the world the way that it normally would. So derealization actually, is part of a process, especially for those who their sort of go-to survival response is the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight, right? Our bodies get just flooded with adrenaline. And when that remains, when that's chronic, when it's over and over and over again, what happens is the adrenaline actually causes swelling in the proprioception parts of the brain. Proprioception is what helps us um, be spatially aware of where our body is in relation to the rest of the world, right? So I know how far away the pen is or the window or the door. Or what my hand is doing and how far away it is and that kind of thing. So it's my physical experiencing in the world. And what happens is when the brain can't keep up with keeping the swelling down, those distorted thoughts, feelings, the visuals, auditory and visual hallucinations are very real things, and that can be part of the derealization process. There's a study out there, and they named it the Alice in Wonderland syndrome, which is so cool. Um, but they talk about this very, very thing. And I think part of the issue has become, we've seen a lot of people who have been diagnosed with schizophrenia because they're seeing and hearing things that should not be there. And while they have obviously they do a lot of childhood histories with these folks, and of course a lot of them have early childhood trauma in their background. So a lot of times we can just attribute this right back to traumatic experiencing and derealization process. And that's not to say everybody, but if someone's going to be diagnosed with schizophrenia, I would hope a brain scan would go along with that. And I should put out there too, I am not a clinical psychologist, so this is not a diagnosis for people who are out there. Let's put that little medical disclaimer out there. My field is in research and education. So we've got highway dissociation, derealization, and then depersonalization. Depersonalization is the process of basically your mental removal from your physical body. So if you've ever heard someone tell a story from, I was watching it happen to me from across the room, or I was floating on the ceiling, or I was across the street when the crash happened, but they were actually in the car. So those are examples of depersonalization. And oftentimes depersonalization happens in extreme trauma events, but also when the system goes into collapse or folding. And that's the extreme form of the freeze response, which is the parasympathetic nervous system. So the cortisol is going crazy, but the body is beginning to shut down all the vital organs, your blood pressure, your heart rate, your respiration, all of those things decrease. Because your body's literally it's preparing to play dead and to survive the event. But your mental processes are sort of watching this from outside your body. It really is an out of body kind of experience. And this theoretically, now we don't, of course, psychology is a science, and we didn't have any brain scans until the 1990s really to compare anything to. So I would say all of this is relatively new. So the studies are the only thing that we can base anything on at this moment, but it doesn't mean it's definitive. And we still don't know so much about the brain, so I don't want to make it sound like this is concrete whatever, because there's several different theories. But the theory about depersonalization, the freeze response, and then going into folding is also a theory about structural dissociation leading to dissociative identity disorder, which is on the extreme of the dissociative disorders, right? So extreme dissociation can become what they call dissociative identity disorder. So what happens in those moments is those extreme traumatic, emotionally driven experiences get locked away in these implicit memory boxes, right? And until the entire system feels as though there is some safety, generally those don't the boxes don't really start to open up, which means those memories don't start to necessarily come back unless there is a sense of safety. Oftentimes there's flashbacks, or you have like these mini flashbacks of events or things that happened, or even emotions, feelings in the body, that get triggered by something usually external. So a smell, a scene, something you're looking at, a certain emotion. So if a commercial comes on and you have a certain emotion, that might actually trigger something deep. Identity disorder is often caused from this extreme freeze process. And when it comes to victims of trafficking, about 35% actually have been diagnosed with DID. So this is a huge sort of missing piece that psychologists really don't like to talk about, because it's been so controversial, and it used to be called multiple personality disorder. And here is Milton for the show. So those are some of the diagnoses that we often see coming out of those who have been abused early on, experienced trauma. Okay, and if I haven't said it lately, please hit the like and subscribe. Share this video, pretty please. Actually, we're gonna dive right into memory, because it all kind of goes in together. So when it comes to memory, we have three different sort of categories of memory. We've got factual memory, episodic memory, and autobiographical memory. So factual memory is the things that we know, right? So when I say tree, you visualize a tree, or you visualize the word tree, you know what a tree is. It's something that you would consider a fact. A tree is a tree, right? We can get into semantics and, is it really a tree? Whatever. But you get the idea. So the things that we typically know that we know. Episodic memory is an episode in time. So it's an event that happens in time. It's got a beginning, a middle, and end. Episodic and factual memory often sort of swim around in the left side of the brain. And I know there's some debate now about, the whole left brain, right brain thing. But there are specialized areas of the brain, not that we don't use mechanisms of both. So, but I just want to make that very, very clear. So it's not like 100% of all of these things are just, stuck in the left or stuck in the right. But when we talk about factual memory, so if you remember the left side of the brain, actually, I don't know if we've gotten there yet. The left side of the brain is it got all the L words. It's logical, it's linguistic, so it's got language in there. It's linear, it goes from one side to the other. It's very much it's what we used to call like our OCD people, right? We have if you love your spreadsheets and your Excel and all of these things, everything's very, very neat and orderly, and a little neuroticism kind of going on the left, which is a good thing. We need that. We need that to form stories. We need language, and we need logic. We need beginning, middle, and end. So factual and episodic memories kind of live in the left. When it comes to autobiographical memory, autobiographical is very holistic. It takes a conglomeration of our memories and creates a story. So factual memory would be, I see a tree. Or I know what a tree is. So I say tree, you see a tree, you can visualize the word tree. Episodic memory would be, I sat under a tree yesterday, right? So it's got something I did in a moment in time, in me as the person. Autobiographical is I'm taking a series of events and putting them into a narrative, into a story. So it might be when I was a kid, I climbed every tree I could, right? So my memory would go back to, climbing one tree over here, and there was a tree at the school, and there was a tree at home, and there was a tree at the neighbors, and how each tree felt to climb. So I'm just going to put that in a very short holistic story that tells you, instead of telling you every single incident of when I climbed a tree, that this was my experience with trees. Okay, that is autobiographical. Now, the right side of the brain is very holistic. This is where autobiographical kind of lives, right? So, when it comes to creating stories, though, we need both sides. We need that holistic. I'm going to put it all together and create my story. And we need factual. We need to know what a tree is, and we need to have experience in time with ourself in it. That's the episodic memory. In order for it to process and go back and forth from the left to the right to create a whole story. So the thing is, when memories are formed, when information comes in, it always travels to the right side first. Well, the right side is where the emotionally stored memories are sort of banked, where they're kept, where those implicit boxes of trauma are really just kind of stuck. So if something triggers us in our environment, it's going to hit the right first, and if it gets snagged, if it gets stuck there, we're kind of stuck swimming in this emotional soup of, I can't tell my story. I've got no language. I've got no logic. And I realize this is probably backwards. So I'm like, this is left, this is right. But I'm not sure if it's left or right on your series. So you get the idea. But we've got this flow of information that gets stuck on the right, and the left can't make any sense of it because it's not flowing through the mid part of the brain, the corpus callosum. So the fascinating part about memory and memory integration and communication is that it's got to flow back and forth between a structure called the corpus callosum. Now, the corpus callosum is a beautiful network of nerves and connections. It's just an array of electricity, right? That spreads up the middle and to both sides of the brain. This is what communicates both sides. So physically, the two sides of your brain are not touching. They're not communicating that way. They're communicating through the corpus callosum, which is absolutely beautiful. The problem is during trauma, oftentimes the corpus callosum begins to diminish, and those networks are not working quite as well. Of course, the hippocampus, when that is shut down, there's really a diminished sense of not a sense, but there's a real diminishment of integration from implicit memory, those memories that are sort of trapped, the memories you don't know that you know. They can't integrate into something that you do know because they're not communicating from left to right. So I can't grab a hold of logic. I can't grab a hold of language to tell you a story, to tell you an autobiographical narrative. So that is the flow of information when we talk about trauma, and then the corpus callosum and all of those good things. So next time we'll actually come back and we'll talk about wellness, some of those things that we can do to repair, or not necessarily repair, but rebuild and wire new connections and new pathways, right? We're laying down new racetracks for information to flow, because those who have experienced trauma have most likely have some diminished development in the brain as far as communication goes. So there are some things that we can do to help restructure and create new neural pathways, new information, and actually begin to tell our story, our autobiographical story, in a way that makes sense. So that is the plan for next time. If you would please do me a favor and like, subscribe, share, that would be wonderful. And I truly appreciate it. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.